It's hard to imagine that now because we're so far removed from it that it's almost hard to say I want to be number one. Little did I know that I would,
Martina Navratilova just said what the entire tennis world has been thinking. And the fact that an 18-time Grand Slam champion felt compelled to say it out loud, with that level of urgency, unprompted, ahead of an entirely different tournament, tells you everything you need to know. The Dubai run didn't just turn heads. It genuinely stunned people who have seen absolutely everything this sport has to offer. Just days ago, on March 2, 2026, Navratilova sat down with WTA, ahead of Indian Wells and Miami, and what she had to say is still echoing across the tennis world.
100%. I think sports has always been on the front of social change and social.
Here's the rewritten version. When Eala's name came up in that conversation, Navratilova's response was immediate and unfiltered. Crafty. A lefty who uses variety in ways most players her age simply cannot execute. Smart. But the serve needs strengthening, and she needs to build her physical presence if she is going to hold her ground against the very best in the world on a consistent basis. This interview landed 2 weeks after Eala had walked onto center court in Dubai ranked 47th in the world, defeated a top 10 player in a tie-break thriller, and transformed a 5,000-capacity stadium into what felt like a national celebration for an entire country. All within 24 hours that nobody in professional tennis had seen coming. To understand why Navratilova's reaction carried the weight it did, you have to go back 1 month before Dubai. Back to Melbourne Park. Back to January 2026. The Australian Open was recording a single-day attendance high of 101,696 spectators, and the loudest, most chaotic scene of the entire fortnight had nothing to do with the main show courts. It was happening on Court 6. Eala was scheduled there for her first-round match against American Alicia Parks. What greeted her when she arrived was not a standard tour-level crowd. Fans overflowed the walkways. Queues stretched back for over an hour. Hundreds of Filipino supporters never made it inside at all. The chants of her name continued long after the match concluded, even after she lost 6-0, 3-6, 2-6. The result barely registered against the spectacle surrounding it. Navratilova and Lindsay Davenport were watching from the Tennis Channel desk. What they saw clearly unsettled them. Davenport said organizers had simply underestimated the situation, that Eala probably needed to be on a bigger show court, that she was almost certainly the most famous female athlete from the Philippines and one of the most famous people to emerge from that country's sporting world, and that the crowd chaos was entirely foreseeable with even basic due diligence. Navratilova went further. She addressed tournament organizers directly, telling them they needed to keep more in mind where players are from and what their actual fan base looks like in practice, not just on paper. There is a massive Filipino audience in Melbourne and across Australia, she said. Account for it next time you build the schedule. The live stream of Eala's post-match press conference that day drew over 100,000 views. More than Aryna Sabalenka and Carlos Alcaraz on the same day. A player who had just lost in the first round of a Grand Slam was generating more digital engagement than two of the biggest names in the sport. That data point alone should have signaled to the tennis world that something significant was building. When the Dubai Duty-Free Tennis Championships arrived in February 2026, the scheduling conversation resurfaced immediately. Eala had never played the tournament before. She arrived ranked world number 47, already the highest-ranked Filipino in WTA Tour history, and was placed last on center court for her second-round match against world number 8 Jasmine Paolini on the night of February 17th. The most coveted scheduling slot in the sport, handed to a player ranked 47th in the world, making her tournament debut. Every person inside that 5,000-capacity stadium understood exactly why. Paolini was not just any top 10 player. She was a former Dubai champion, a two-time Grand Slam finalist, having reached both the 2024 Roland Garros and Wimbledon finals. A player with considerably more experience navigating the specific pressure of high-stakes night sessions than a 20-year-old appearing in the tournament for the first time. On paper, the match had a clear and predictable outcome. On center court that night it had anything but. Eala took the first set 6-1 in a display that was almost difficult to process given the occasion. She landed 67% of her first serves and won 86% of those points. She did not concede a single break point in the entire set. For a player whose serve had been consistently identified as the most vulnerable area of her game, the element requiring the most urgent development, that opening set was a statement that carried weight far beyond the scoreline. The second set told a completely different story. Eala built a 5-3 lead and had match points in hand. Paolini, drawing on years of experience in precisely these situations, saved them. She fought back to level at 5-5, then broke Eala as she served for the match. The set went to a tiebreak. The first 8 points of that tiebreak all ended in outright winners. A sequence of tennis that had the crowd on its feet before either player had secured a single mini-break. Eala eventually closed it out on her 5th match point. When the final ball landed, the stadium erupted with an intensity that made it feel less like a second-round match at a WTA 1000 event and more like a cup final. Outside in the tennis village, Filipino supporters who had gathered around outdoor screens, surrounded by Philippine flags and signs reading Laban Alex, which translates to Fight Alex, were celebrating with the same abandon. Eala walked to the center of the court and addressed the crowd directly, switching briefly into Tagalog. She said she had looked up during the tiebreak and thought about how many of them were praying for her. She said she had to give everything she had because of it. It was the kind of moment that gets clipped, shared, and rewatched repeatedly. And within 24 hours, the tennis world was not simply talking about the win. It was talking about what the win represented. Within that 24-hour window after the Paolini match, 2 things happened simultaneously. The tennis media began debating whether Eala had already become the sport's biggest draw, regardless of ranking, regardless of results, regardless of any conventional metric the sport had previously used to determine who deserved the spotlight. And tournament organizers walked directly into criticism for their decision to schedule her quarterfinal against Coco Gauff as the opening match of the evening session rather than the closing one. The concern was specific and entirely legitimate. Filipino fans watching from home faced an 11 o'clock local start time if Eala opened the night session, a reasonable hour to tune in and stay engaged. If she closed it instead, the match before hers, Alina Svitolina against Antonia Ruzic, would conclude well past midnight Manila time, and the Filipino audience would be arriving exhausted rather than energized. Moving Eala to open the session solved that problem but created another. The match following hers risked playing to a half-empty arena, robbed of the crowd energy that her supporters had sustained throughout the entire tournament. It was a scheduling dilemma with no clean resolution. But the fact that this dilemma existed at all, that one player's presence had begun reshaping the logistical thinking of an entire WTA 1000 event, underlined something that the sport was only beginning to fully reckon with. After her third-round match on center court the evening before the Gauff encounter, Gauff herself had apologized to the Filipino crowd during her post-match interview for making them wait so long to see their player. The crowd had not been hostile toward her. They simply had somewhere else to be emotionally that night. Gauff took it in stride with characteristic humor, but the underlying reality was impossible to dismiss. The crowd dynamic at a WTA tournament had been fundamentally altered by the presence of a single player ranked 47th in the world. The Gauff quarterfinal on February 19 did not go Eala's way. She lost 6-0, 6-2 in just over an hour, looking physically fatigued in a way that surprised observers given she had played only 4 hours and 15 minutes of tennis across her previous matches in the draw. Her serve, the same weapon that had been so reliable against Paolini, fell apart completely. She won 32% of points behind her first serve and 40% behind her second. Against a player of Gauff's quality and competitive intelligence, those numbers were never going to hold up regardless of anything else in the tactical equation. But despite the scoreline, Eala left center court to the same volume of support she had received after every victory. Gauff acknowledged it afterwards, saying she had known the crowd was predominantly there for Eala, that she had been telling herself the cheers were for her just to get through the match, and that she had genuinely found the packed, electric atmosphere helpful even though it was directed elsewhere. She also said Eala was a tough competitor and that even standing at 6-0 in the first set, she had never felt entirely comfortable, because she had already seen what this player was capable of when fully dialed in. Jessica Pegula, watching from within the tournament grounds, described Eala as someone who had been packing stadiums and handling the attention with a maturity and grace that was genuinely striking for a 20-year-old. Steve Johnson, speaking on the Nothing Major podcast, said straight out that she was one of the hottest tickets in women's tennis right now without being anywhere near the top 10 in the rankings, and called the crowd dynamic of the golf match, where a two-time Grand Slam champion did not have the crowd on her side in her own quarterfinal, simply not normal. 2 weeks after Dubai concluded, Navratilova sat down with WTA. Ahead of Indian Wells and Miami. When Eala's name came up in the context of the Sunshine Swing, she did not hesitate. She called her crafty. She said the left-handed variety was real and genuinely effective in ways that most players her age are not capable of executing. She identified the serve as the area requiring the most urgent development, a bigger delivery, a heavier kick, more consistent pace, and said Eala needed to believe in herself and build her physical presence as she continued ascending at this level. Coming from Navratilova, whose own serve was one of the most technically sophisticated in the history of the women's game, that particular critique carried a very specific weight. This was not dismissal. This was not damning with faint praise. This was the kind of detailed, specific, technically grounded assessment that gets reserved for players a legend genuinely believes have the foundation to go considerably further. 4 days after losing to Goff on February 23, Eala rose 16 spots in the WTA rankings to world number 31, a new career high. 1 year earlier, she had been ranked outside the top 100. The climb has been relentless, and it has happened alongside a phenomenon that no ranking number is capable of fully capturing. Navratilova saw something at the Australian Open in January that she could not explain through conventional tennis metrics. She saw the data coming out of Dubai in February and recognized it as confirmation of what she had already sensed. And when she spoke on March 2, she was not simply commenting on a promising young player with an interesting story. She was trying to make sense of something center court had not seen quite like this before.